trying to say. I hope everyone out there got it as well. Should be topic number 4 tonight. It says timeout boxes. This is a prime example of the school to prison pipeline. This comes with a link that's going to take us to Instagram. StreamYard needs to fix this. I gotta do it again. Instagram. Yeah, so this takes us to Instagram. Make sure you guys can see my screen. All right, it should be coming up now. Yeah, so this takes us to Instagram. We'll watch it maybe twice if need be. This is from Pan-African Homeschool Network.
Parents in upstate New York are outraged. A school investigation underway after allegations came out that staff were using wooden timeout boxes built for special needs students. These boxes, lined with a padded mat, were allegedly being used as a behavioral calming measure. Salmon River School District board directors closed campus last week after launching an investigation. The superintendent of schools was placed on at-home duties, and other staff have been placed on administrative leave pending further notice. The claims are making national headlines and garnering the attention of New York Governor Kathy Hochul. Joining me now is former Salmon River School Board member Chrissy Jacobs. Ms. Jacobs, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sego.
I don't have to tell you that this was definitely a topic of conversation here in the newsroom. When we saw this story, we heard about it, we were excited to speak with you. Chrissy, you also posted on.
Well, I don't like the word timeout boxes because it minimizes the damage and the trauma that our families have experienced. I'm going to call them what they are: child-size shoes, child-size holes. Got a hold of these images because a concerned community member forwarded them to me who worked in the school and was resigning. So you have full permission to use them. We need all the help we can get. We've spent the last couple of decades silenced by the school district and the New York State Department of Education when it comes to treatment of children in upstate New York.
And Ms. Jacobs, because it should not matter whether or not I have a child in that classroom or not, I would think that any parent would be outraged. The person who forwarded the photos to you, did they see it actually a child inside at any time, or are they saying this is something they had planned to do with those boxes?
No, so those boxes were specifically built with one student in mind, according to Principal Allison Benedict. We have come to find out from sources within the school district and within the St. Regis Mohawk School that Fromm, who was a behavioral specialist that the district brought in, was pressuring staff to use these boxes. This is one of 3 within the Salmon River School District. And they were also being pressured to use closets or bookshelves to corral children.
How do you believe something like this could happen? Even as I look at this, and I had a conversation with my producer, someone discussed it, someone planned it, someone put it in, and no one within all of these adults thought this was a bad idea?
I think what we're seeing is a direct relation to what happens when you dehumanize any population or demographic of people. Eventually, we just become statistics on a paper for funding.
Ms. Jacobs, when you see this and you've raised the attention with us, you're speaking with us now, what is it that you hope happens? Ms. Jacobs, I want to thank you again for joining us. That was Chrissy Jacobs, who brought to our attention here at News Nation these boxes, these images that you see on your screen. I had called them a timeout box, and she corrected me by saying, I don't want to call them that. I want to call them what they are, that these are boxes holding children, and it's unacceptable. We will, of course, continue to follow this story as it develops. And we're also We have a request out to the governor, Governor Kathy Hochul, to get her responses. Parents and
Yeah, sorry about that. My is glitching a little bit here. So that that was the video. Hold on a second. My computer is acting up. That was the video. I also need to read this. Kind of difficult to read. It says, let's be clear. These are not timeout boxes. This is solitary confinement, and its lasting, damaging psychological effects are well documented. This is a blatant manifestation of the school to prison pipeline. Systems and practices that push children, especially Black, Indigenous, disabled, and I'm guessing low income students, out of schools and into the criminal legal system instead of supporting their learning and behavior. This pipeline includes the criminalization of normal childhood behavior, zero tolerance policies, police presence in schools, and exclusion from education through suspension and expulsion. It mirrors older systems of social control where institutions discipline rather than nurture Black youth. We see the same pattern today as excessive resources are poured into military and defense spending, while the U.S. Department of Education is simultaneously dismantled. Between the epidemic of school shootings, the concealment of the Epstein files, and support for the genocide in Gaza, America is arguably the most child-hating society on earth. Only a disconnected, self-hating people will allow their children to be subjected to this level of horror and degradation. Solutions. How do we disrupt this pipeline? We must invest in alternative and culturally responsive education models. Pan-African education not only affirms Black identity, culture, and genius, but centers African and diasporic our story as foundational, not supplemental, while teaching children to interpret power structures rather than internalize blame. This type of education is imperative to our very survival as African people. We must prioritize equipping our children with a knowledge of self. For those who find homeschooling challenging, there are African-centered schools and co-ops, as well as virtual online schools available for enrollment. For a free school directory, please visit TPT Store, link in the bio. So you guys could navigate to this page on Instagram, and you guys can check out the link in the bio. Homeschooling. This was a very important. I mean, it's still a very important topic for me too. But this was huge to me a couple of years ago when I recognized that it really is the education. By the time you start to try to work with adults, you're too late, unfortunately. It's very hard to change. It's very hard to fix a broken thing, but if you can get to that thing early on and give it the attributes that you want, then you stand a chance. And Pan-African, African-centered schooling, super important, and this is an example of why. These guys are straight up throwing your children into solitary confinement within school. The school system. If you're listening to this and you're not in America to see it, particularly in like places like New York and stuff, if you're not here to see it, you wouldn't know. But a lot of these schools are built like prisons. heavy gates on the windows and all kind of shit. Like they're built like prisons. The whole design of the school. See, where I come from, we didn't have a cafeteria, right? These guys have a cafeteria and a setup, a gym and a setup in one building that resembles prison, man. That resembles prison. I work at a college that's next door to a high school. If I'm not mistaken, I think Oni went to that school, so I'm not going to call the name of the school. But you walk past this thing and you look at it, it looks like a prison. You know. Anyway, I digress. Let me start with Buana on this one. Let me mix it up. Buana, what say you?
Cool. I see this two ways. Okay, I see this two ways because Black Steel have a favorite saying, right? Black Steel is say fuck them kids. You know, he say fuck them kids. And my lady is a primary school teacher. So I understand the frustration because I get to hear it all the goddamn time. But this is extreme, man. This extreme. You gotta be so frustrated that you're putting the child into a hot box. You remember the movie The Django when they used to they put the slaves, the unruly slaves, into the hot box. This is the hot box. This is the hot box. I think that there should be a there should be a better way to maybe discipline a child and go about doing these things, because if you put my child in the hot box, I could put you in the hot box, so to avoid being arrested and sent to prison, because it is confinement. It's unlawful confinement. You're putting someone in a position where, what they call it, I forget the legal term for it. I can't remember it right now. It don't ain't on the top of my head, but you can't do that. That's highly illegal. I don't see how a school system would permit this to happen. I really don't see that. I don't see the. I think there must be a better way to where you could satisfy the teacher's end, because that's not being stated here, and the teacher's frustration in the classroom setting, and you could also satisfy the needs of the child and the needs of the parent. There must be a better way, and there should be, all these three people should come together and figure out a way where you can resolve the issues of disruptive children in the classrooms, because this is extreme. I see this as the hot box in Django. I really see it as that. But I'm sure um, that the actual school teacher will probably be able to elucidate and make it clear to what's actually happening and any kind of solutions that's possible in educating Black children. I'll leave it there.
Appreciate that, Buana. Yeah, Trigger Happy makes a good point here. He says there is a lot to that. If schools have the energy of prisons, this means we need to rebuild architectural science from a cultural perspective too, because a lot of Western architecture is surveillance. Absolutely. I tell you, I couldn't, when I started to realize it, I couldn't unsee it again. That goes to another conversation of when you are a little bit aware out here. It's all you can muster not to be crazy. Not to be crazy with all the stuff that you constantly see that's like geared towards subjugation. That it would require us to really get back some power, but some understanding of who we were. We got to get away from some of this shit. In fact, all of this stuff. We got to get away from this stuff. Black Seal, what say you to what you've seen and heard so far?
Man. Well, first of all, this is completely illegal, right? Whoever set this up needs to be locked and needs to go to jail. There's no excuse for them to be creating solitary confinement for any child. And this makes me think this might have been a special needs child. This might have been in like what we call SPED, special education. This child probably had been difficult, had been causing problems. And it was also in a primary school, because there's no way you get no kid in high school in one of these things. But I believe it's probably just a situation of just the faculty they either weren't trained, they didn't have the proper support, they just didn't know what to do. Or also too, maybe they just didn't give a damn. And that unfortunately is a reality of the profession. Sometimes you just don't give a damn about helping these kids. You've reached your wits end. You've dealt with so many defiant situations. Um, Apathy is a big issue within the teaching profession because sometimes it's just you have the parents fighting back against you and the students fighting back against you, and you're just like, what's the point? So but all that said, there's no excuse for this type of nonsense. There's a reason why it's called the school to prison pipeline, right? Many of these children are funneled into the prison system. Whenever I don't have to watch ISS, but if you look at the ISS list, every morning we get an email of the kids who are in ISS and the kids who are in OSS. And they always tell us send some work down to that classroom so they can work on it. The majority of the kids in ISS tend to be Black or Hispanic. There's a lot of reasons for that, you know. And I myself have made it a point to only write referrals as a last resort because I know there's so many of our young people who are being caught up in these systems, being referred to the office for discipline. How are you going to pass if you're spending 3 days out of the week for ISS? But at the same time, you can't not enforce the rules. So if a child skips your class, you have to notify him. Your job could be in danger. So teachers in many places are forced to participate in this system because you have a child who is disrupting class, and there's many reasons why they may be disrupting. But the point is, you're still disrupting my class. So if I've talked to you about it, I've called your parent about it. Now I have to refer you to the admin for discipline. But all that said, there's no excuse to lock a child in a box for discipline. That child's not going to learn anything. And you're not meant to learn anything in that situation. You're meant to know your place, right? This is a teacher who has given up on that child. And what they want to do is teach the rest of the class and have that other child out the way. There's no excuse for that. None whatsoever. Um, I hope the family they sue, they get all their money. Um, I don't know about homeschool. Homeschool is an option for some people, but I also we live in a country where 54% of the people can't read above a sixth grade level. So I don't know about homeschool. That hopefully that's an option for some people. Um, but I found that the kids that I have taught, when they come from homeschool, they tend to be very behind, right? They tend to not have the reading, the math, the comprehension skills. And that's not the case for all of them. I certainly know there are some kids who are homeschooled that are very advanced, but I would say 9 out of 10 kids that I have taught that come from homeschool really, really struggle to keep up with the high school caseload. I've seen that just personally. Um, African centered schools are a great thing. I think that the education system is already biased. When you look at who's making the textbooks, where that information is coming from. In the United States, the biggest school district is in Texas, which is where here we go, right wing evangelical place. So the textbooks coming out of there tend to skew very conservative. It's not a objective matter. And then you have to teach these children, especially Black children, man. You got to go beyond what's taught within just the school system. And as parents and people in the community, there's a responsibility to do more for our young people, because if you don't, they'll just end up being taught the mess and they'll believe it. They'll believe it. So I don't know. I think this is a horrible situation. I feel terrible for that child that was caught up in this mess. I think that's an awful situation. Whoever did this, like I said, lock them up. There's no excuse for that. Straight directly to jail. I just have questions. What type of district is it? Is this a district? It's a Title I district, or are we low on resources, or what's happening here? I just have so many questions about this situation because you would think a school district would have something going for it. Like, why isn't this child not getting a proper education. Why is it? What's going on with this? Are we in a situation where they don't have the money? Is I don't know. I don't know. I have so many questions, but whatever the question is, there's no excuse for this, and lock their ass up.
Shout out to OG Kicks in the chat. I saw something here a second ago, but yeah, in the chat, Sister Cheryl mentions how even the food served is like prison foods, and I could swear I saw an article. I didn't read the full thing, but I saw an article this week that was saying something like leftover prison food is being given to kids in schools now. It's a thing, man. That school to prison pipeline is a thing, and what hurts me about it is that a lot of us are aware that there's this pipeline, but somehow we're not so keen on seeing all these different things. I mean, a box. You put a child in a box. Where'd you get that from? Where'd you get the idea to even do that from? You know, so this is why, you know, we really, when these topics come up and they tie into the homeschooling type thing, you know, for me, it's not even necessarily homeschooling. It's getting an African-centered education. What do I mean? You might have, for whatever reason, I've always said this, you might have to send a kid into the Eurocentric school model that our kids tend to go to. But at home, what are you doing? You don't have no kind of little curriculum. Hey, read this, sit and listen to this, do this. You don't have, right? You're not teaching some history to, even if it's, you know, history via your family to connect them to their folks, their kin, right? Like, you know, yeah.
Coco, you are an educated man, and so is everyone else on this panel. I'm as educated as most people. When you consider homeschool, you have to be adequately able to teach people. When you talk about African cent, if you ain't African centered, you ain't never read or study. I could sit down and listen to Brother Bakari is an extremely practical individual, extremely practical. So he can tell you the practical things to live life, to live in the real world. The I would Black Steel is an educator. He could have a home-centered school. You are a sophisticated professional person. I could see you, but you talking rank and file people now. So if you pull them out of the school system, and the children need to learn basic math and English, and the teacher, Black Steel is telling you most people reading at a 6th grade level. Even if you pull them out of school, he's still creating problems. So what you can do, Koku? What you can do?
To your
but
point,
Juana,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But Juana,
No,
I mentioned that hold on a second. Black Steel. I mentioned that I mentioned that you might still have to send some kids to the Eurocentric schools because that's the system that we're under right now, and we might not have all the resources in you know, throughout our communities, blah blah blah, right? I acknowledge that they might still have to go there, but what I'm saying is, at the very least, this is my biggest issue with Black folks. At the very least, at home, you could practice some Gaviism. You could talk about some African leaders. You could talk about Malcolm X and have like serious discussions about what those guys meant, what was their work, What did they die for? Like, you could talk about some stuff that can still center these children. You make them understand, yeah, you go out there to that school because that's the part of the system, and right now we don't have our own stuff, so you're gonna have to be a part of the system. Blah blah blah. You could break it down, but to have nothing centering, even at home, to me that's a big letdown. That's a big letdown. We should be holding these kids' hands and teaching them something, tying them to some concept that was before their time. That's close to the community, man. That's what I'm talking about. Even if they still have to go to this white man's school to learn arithmetic. Brother Bakari, what say you to what you heard?
Okay. First, I want to say that being upstate New York, there probably was no black kid in that box. I'm just saying. Not saying it's right to put no kid in there, but I'm just saying it being upstate New York is not a whole lot of us up that way. On the homeschool thing, when we talk about homeschool, what I tried to do here, me and a couple of people was trying to do here. You want to have to find a teacher who want to work extra, maybe a few days a week. I'm going to use Blacksteel for an instance, right? We can talk homeschool, but we do need educators, like Bawana said. And we're going to need to pay Blacksteel for his time. And that and that became the problem. Man, we need to come up with at least if she's giving us 3 days a week after school, because our kids still need to be socialized with other kids. You can't, you're gonna just keep them in the house all the time. They have to socialize, know how to deal with other people outside. But I said we need to come up with at least $1,000 a week. Find us good teacher who want to do this part-time. Come up with $1,000 a week. Then that became the problem. So to say our kids just need to be homeschooled, it sounds good to say. It sounds real good to say, but are we willing to do what it takes to make sure your child is homeschooled properly? So now back to we talking about the education at the school. You're right. The school education ain't the greatest, I guess. But you know why? I'm going to be honest. You know why I didn't have a problem with the high school education? With the school education? And I'm from Mississippi. I didn't have a problem because I had some folks teaching me at home. My kids, when they went to school, they knew how to read when they was 5 years old. See, we blame the school for everything. My child is in the 2nd grade and can't read. Yeah, the school should be working on that. But were you working on their reading when they were 5? Were you working on them counting? Could they count when they were 3, 4 years old? What were you doing? Or did we just babysit, then send our kids to these European schools and say the European schools failing us when we don't ever look in the mirror and say what we are doing wrong, right? So I know this is about the school being from the school to prison pipeline. I don't know. I guess it could be. There's certain things in there. What they say, the way it's done. I'm gonna be honest. I don't know how things done in prison because I have done my best throughout my 54 years not to go in there. But could there be something to that? Yes, I would say there's something to that, especially in our community. There's something to that. But I also say there's things that we have to do. We know they want to do this to us. So why aren't we doing something different? That's all I'm saying. Yeah, they want us in prison. They want us dead. They want everything bad to us. But what are we doing for our children to make it better for them and make it easier when they go to school? Now, if that was my child, somebody put in that damn hot box, as Bawana called it, there would have been a problem. it would have been a problem. But you know why they wouldn't have put my child in that hot box? Because I knew all the damn teachers at the school where my kids went to, and I'm gonna make sure I'm going to meetings. I'm doing parent-teacher meetings, and they know how they knew who I was. You gonna have problems if that's what you planning to do to my child. Don't you ever do that to my child. You shouldn't do it to none. But you ain't gonna do it to mine. We have to get to know our teachers. We have to make those parent-teacher conferences. You have to make the PTO meetings when you can. Or if you can't, and this is what I tell people, something we used to talk about, if you can't make certain meetings, that's why you need to organize and group up with people, because if everybody can, you can't make all the meetings all the time, but at least you can have, if you got your group, 5, 10, 15 people, somebody from their group, a couple of people from that group can make the meeting to let you know what's going on. And that's what we have to do to combat that. I yield the mic.
Really quick
So
before we
I
go.
know I cut off Phil. Go ahead, Phil.
So one thing that I feel like is the problem with African-centered education is that many Black people have low racial esteem, right? They don't see the value in learning anything about Africa or learning anything about their culture. We recently, we had a recent unit talking about nationalism and whatnot, independence movements and whatnot. So we had a day, we talked about the Haitian Revolution. And I had a young man in my class. He's been in trouble with the law before, stealing cars or whatnot. He's always been respectful to me, but he's had some problems. He was visibly angry because he never knew how Black people were treated during slavery. He's heard the jokes that the kids say, but when he saw the people being stripped naked and whipped and all type of violence, he was like, "Yo, mister, is that really how they treated us during slavery?" I said, "Yes, you sound as if you never heard it before." So he had a Black teacher like myself. There's not a lot of Black teachers at the school, but I did not learn anything about Black history within my school, honestly. Everything I learned came from my mother, and she took the time to educate me. So I say all that to say that you're not going to get any type of African-centered education for people who are African-centered, who have low racial esteem, who try their best to distance themselves from being African, who do their best to attach themselves to America. And I think that's part of the problem, is that the education is not being taught at home. The fundamental skills that can help a child at home are not being taught at home. And everything's on the teacher. You have kids in first grade who don't know how to wipe their ass. You have kids who are coming into high school reading at a 7th grade level. So what happens when the child can't keep up in school? When they don't know the material, they become disruptive. And that's what I've seen, that when they cannot do the work, that's when they start to cause problems. So then you have to take time out your day and do individually with this one child one-on-one to help them get up to speed, to help bring them up to the skills that they need to have. And then the rest of the class is falling behind. So I think it's a dual-edged sword, but I think that, to Bakari's point, it does have to be done at home. It shouldn't be a situation where you go to open house and the only parent, and this happened to me, I have open house, I have 3 parents, and all the parents that are there are the kids who have A's. So the kids who have D's and F's, their parents not only aren't responding to the emails and the phone calls, but they're not showing up to the open house to discuss their child's grades. And then they want to talk about the school failing. But it should be a cooperative effort. It should be an effort where the parents and the child work together. With that said, there are some teachers that are very, very punitive towards their students. They don't look at their students as scholars, they look at them as a problem. And these kids know that. These kids don't want to learn from somebody who will write them up for breathing hard, or who's insulting their intelligence. So you do have that level of it as well. You do have some issues where the kids don't want to learn because they don't like the teacher, and the teacher doesn't like the kids. He's hostile towards the kids. He's disrespectful to the kids. Um, and that those type of things they get around. So these kids don't want to tap to participate, and that's where that school to prison pipeline comes in. When these kids already come into the school and they're treated as if they're a problem by the administrators, by the school staff, by the teachers, then you're gonna have pushback. I mean, I know we're getting off topic doing with this child in the box, but I do think that's part of the problem.
Black Steel, why would I want to learn that the white man created everything in the whole universe? And when they find me in Africa, they find me with a bone in my nose, climbing on trees. And God help us for bringing us to America, for giving us, for civilizing us and giving us some education. Because if not for that, I would be in Africa with a bone in my nose, running with lions and tigers, because I never created no contribution to humanity, to civilization. I have a deaf ear to that. I don't want to listen to that bullshit. But I mean, I understand that's a system, but I don't want to listen to that. Of course I ain't listening to that. You
Well,
know,
I
so
don't. I could just speak. I can't speak to every state's curriculum, but I don't teach that. And I will say that they do. They have an entire unit based on Africa pre European colonization. So we teach about Ghana, Mali, Songhai. We talk about all of that. So I think we have done a little bit more than there was in the past. When I was in school, they do try to include some things that talk about European pre-colonization Africa. So I think that's something that they have improved on.
Yeah, and let me say this: even here, when my kids were in middle school, one of their history teachers they taught about the Egypt being black. My son was here. He was taught about Mansa Musa. They don't just. There are some schools. There are some teachers. There are some teachers, even if it's not part of the school curriculum. There are some teachers that go out of their way. One of my great nieces in Mississippi, there was school she was going to teach it. You found a lot of these go out of their way to teach about what the greatness of Africa and us. They'll talk about us coming from Africa and what happened, and also, but the African culture that we were able to keep. So, but I understand what you're saying, Bwana, for the most part, that is probably what they teach for the most part. But I'm just piggybacking off off Black Steel.
Sister Cheryl, what say you? Timeout boxes. Is this a prime example of the school to prison pipeline to you?
Yeah, of course. It's just one of those things. It's just, they have to do it on a special needs population because ain't no regular kid they gonna let get away. No regular kid is gonna like look at that and be like, oh no. You know what I mean? They're gonna be like, I ain't sitting in that. They have to try it on special needs kids. I think it's like one of those things that they just do the experiment just to see what happens so they can monitor it. And it's not for really any benefit, but just to see what happens. Cause they do stuff like that all the time. So yeah, I agree pretty much what everybody says about that. But in terms of like everything else that we're talking about and like how our children are educated, um, I'm speaking from a certain perspective because I do have the means to teach my child at home. But I think when people say things like homeschool, they tend to everybody has a kind of a different definition of what homeschooling is. So, for instance, when there was COVID and all the kids had to be at home on the computers, being taught through the computers, that's home for them. That's homeschooling, but that's not homeschooling for us as people who are Afrocentric. That's just the same thing that you get in school. which of course when they went back to school, they were just as unprepared as before they left because they're doing the same thing that they were doing when they were in person. But to regular people, that's homeschooling. But for us, that's not homeschooling. That's not homeschooling at all. Um, Also, when we say things like children, that are homeschooled tend to fall behind, I see what people are getting at when they're saying that, but also I think we should look at this from a different perspective because what about what about kids who don't fall behind and kids who get good grades, right? They come out, whether it's public or Catholic, whatever school, private. You have a lot of Black children that come out of these schools, and they have no idea what it means to value their own communities and to give back to their own communities. All they know, especially if they go to a a Catholic school or private school, these kids, all they know is I need to go and get me a good white man job. Okay, so we got a whole another thing that we're dealing with. And I understand some kids, they go to school, they don't understand, they don't know how to read, write, and do all that stuff. Yes, I do agree with people who say that the parents should be there to assist them and everything, but everybody's situation isn't the same. You got some parents, they work night shift. You got all these different elements, and so I think these are the things that are contributing to that. But also, like when the child does, even if the child does have the Black child has their family to help them with math and science and all of that. My Fortunately, just from my perspective, my mom did that with me. That's why when I went to school was boring. It's just like a big daycare to me, because what are they really teaching us? I went to a public school, but they don't teach you how to write. They don't teach you how to really read. They just do the thing. They just do it. And if you can keep up, then you keep up. But they don't actually teach you from. That's just from a personal perspective. There's different types of public schools, and people could make the argument that, oh, well, maybe these public schools are better, or these Catholic schools are better. But are they better though? Because when these children graduate from high school, they have these good grades and all, but they don't care anything about their own community. So what is it worth? What is the value system behind it? Because if you don't have the right value system, what are we talking about?
Well, Cheryl, I think to your point, I don't think that's the school's job, though. I think that is something to be taught by the parents. I think that's kind of the issue, is that people are expecting the schools to do a little bit, take on a role that they were never meant to. I think that these kids, parents put their kids in private school for different reasons. Like you mentioned Catholic school. I'm just going to follow up with that.
Mm-hmm.
You go to many times you got these nuns teaching these kids or whatnot. They come out and they can pass that test. They can pass the SAT, ACT, getting good test scores, and get into the college of their choice. They want to have their children go to school, learn their arithmetic and their ABCs, and learn how to do these equations and whatever the fuck, and graduate and come out and go to college, right? But the education was never meant to tie them to their culture. But I don't think that it should. That's something that it should. That is something that we as African people have to take upon ourselves and to educate our young people to appreciate their culture. I think that's not the job of the alien, and that's the job of the enemy. Since we're forced to send our kids to school, if you got to send them there by law, go there, read, learn your mathematics, learn how to do this stuff or whatever, graduate. But at the same time, we should be instilling within them their culture. And I think the reason we don't is because our communities are so broken. The
I,
days of the Panthers Party
I think
long gone, where they would have community organizations and book clubs and things like that. Those days are long gone.
But the school is always a reflection of the missionary systems that they have, the Christian missionary system. So, like that's precisely why it doesn't matter if we as Black people are sending our children to a public school, private school, um, Catholic school, because a lot of parents who send their children to Catholic and private schools do so because they believe their children are going to get a better education. But to them, better is including religion. That's why, yeah, that's why they do it. So, but what I'm saying is, yeah, it's not the school's job, and that's the whole point. That's the whole point of the cultural part. I think we as Black people eh, don't pay attention to, because our parents were also trained in the missionary way of learning. So, I mean, of course, there, we can say, oh, well, it starts at home. Well, it starts at home, and and we just talk in a circle. But if we don't add culture into that, it's lost. Even if you have other races of people, they send their children to these schools, but when they come out of the school, they're centered on their culture. So whatever they do, they apply it to that. They don't just run off and go and do these some of them may go to a white company and do these things, but they're encouraged by their communities to keep it within their people. And we are encouraged as Black people to do the opposite. We're encouraged to avoid our culture and don't include ourselves as the essence of who we are in what we do for work. So we don't think that's important. It's just it's the missionary school system. So I mean, we follow it wholly and fully. No culture whatsoever is involved. That's the problem.
All right. If there's no last thoughts here, by the way, shout out to Kofi, the Black Critic out there in the chat. If there's no last thoughts here, let's go to Shoot the Breeze topic number 5, which will probably be the last topic for tonight. If you haven't already, please hit the like button, share the show to your social media